Republicans specifically have refused to adhere any sort of good legislation that might actually protect kids from mass shootings. And instead, Republicans in Texas have passed something that it completely ignores the issues of guns, but instead forces elementary schools to have cops who have guns at every school. Some more on that now from Fort Worth Star-Telegram. Texas lawmakers passed House Bill 3, which requires school districts to place at least one armed officer at every campus during regular school hours. Those officers could be members of a district's own police department, school resource officers, or off-duty officers working as private security. The law, which was passed in response to the Uvalde shooting, included a deadline of September 1st for districts to have officers in place. But it only provided enough extra funding to cover a fraction of the expense of hiring new officers, leaving districts to pick up the rest. Mind you, that's money that's not going towards teachers. That's money that's not going towards materials for the students to have in the classroom. That's money that's not going to lunches for students. That's money that's being spent to have a cop standing in front of the door. Now, the Texas legislature meets every other year for 5 months, which is why the legislation following the May 2022 Uvalde shooting passed this year, in case you were wondering. But the lack of funding is a big deal, as I just mentioned, in education, which is notoriously underfunded, particularly in the South and in Texas specifically. Now, Fort Worth, Texas, for example, is gonna have to pay $8.3 million versus the 2.7 they'll receive in additional funding. Now, this is as a recent study placed them 44th out of 50 for per pupil funding. So these kids are already not getting the educational resources they need, and now more of that is going to be diverted towards paying cops. And of course, we have the other issue, which is that this lack of funding is going to be used to justify school choice and voucher programs. Now, in addition to there being inadequate funding that will impact student performances, there's a cop shortage that Fox News keeps talking about. And it would get worse because of this. Now, many cities across the country, including Fort Worth, are dealing with a critical shortage of police officers. Fort Worth has about 140 vacant officer positions, and that shortage could get worse over the next few years as many of these cities' current officers retire, which is why some districts in Texas are leaning on retired officers to fill these school safety officer positions. The work Brandon and the other safety officers do in Burleson ISD is a big change from what he did as a detective, he said. Homicide detectives work with families of victims, identify suspects, and ideally make arrests. School safety officers focus on building relationships with students, parents, and teachers, he said, which takes time. And of course, Senator Turner, they passed this ineffective measure to try to prevent gun violence without actually doing any of the work to prevent gun violence. And they're bringing these officers in who don't have any experience, working security for a school. They don't really know what they're supposed to be looking for. And most of them are probably not going to have anything to do but is sit there and scare the children who are now going to school in an increasingly militarized, environment.
Well, it's clear that they weren't serious, because if they were serious, they would have funded their own venture. All right, I think you and I kind of may part ways just a little bit. I mean, when I think about it from the perspective of the Uvalde shooting and whether or not the goal of the legislature, but we know it wasn't total goal, but part of the goal of the legislature to try to put some protections in place to prevent an active shooter. Mm-hmm. So that's the only reason why for this one, I'm not going, too hard the other way. However, there's a however to this. If they were serious about that, then they would provide the resources that these school districts need to be able to play that out. But they're not serious. And as you laid out, they are causing extra chaos and pain for these school districts that already don't have enough money to educate children as it is. And then there should be a global approach to this. Somehow we think we can police our way out of everything. And that in fact is not true. It's been proven not to be true. And though that police shortage that you just laid out there, I mean, it's very true. Those facts speak. I mean, even right here in my home city of Cleveland, there is definitely a shortage of police officers across the country. So I come at this particular story this way, that if the goal is truly But we see they full of. If the goal was fully to protect children from an active shooter, then they should have fully funded this. But that was not the goal at all. This is a whole bunch of nonsense.
Yeah, and we saw the legislators sort of disregard the wishes and the advocacy of the parents who were victimized by what happened at Uvalde. And how many cops were there? They got there within 3 minutes. Did they stop that mass shooting? No, they did not. Not until it was far, far, far too late. But we'll keep everybody updated on what's going on there. It's along with the cop shortage across the country.
For more political news breakdowns, interviews, stories of activism, and me trying my hardest to care about the occasional big celebrity news story, subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/The Damage Report. And you can ring the bell wherever it is so you don't miss anything.